Travel and Things, in association with Sun Destinations, iconic destinations with amazing experiences, present In Conversation With. I am your host, David Batsoffen, and I'm joined today by the man who put this together, the Quagga Project, Quagga Revival in South Africa, and that is March Turnbull. March, a very good morning and welcome to you.
Hi, good morning, David.
Why the Quagga?
Quick correction, if nothing else. I'm certainly only one of many, many people who are involved in the Quagga project. The Quagga is terribly important because it was an utterly useless extirpation of an animal. There
Right.
was no tremendous value in it, in the sense of ivory or these things that we hear about now. It just was in the way, and it's terribly sad. And rebreeding it is doable. And as I know you've learned, that's quite unusual in the game of rebreeding lost
It, it
answers.
it is indeed because people will go, why? And I suppose the question that needs to be asked, did these herds of quagga is the collective for quagga the same as the collective for zebra, which is a dazzle? Did they follow the springbok that seemed to just be shot out for sport?
I think the tragedy of the quagga is that it doesn't dazzle in quite the same way.
Yeah.
Um, it's actually even more mundane than that. We're talking about central South Africa, the Karoo regions, up towards the Drakensberg, up towards the
Mm.
northern, then Free State. It took grazing from farmers who were really marginal farmers. It was on wagon routes up to the diamond fields, and people were looking for leather and food. It was easy, not necessarily easy to shoot at, but it was part of the great assemblage that the hunters of Europe and on their way back from India went to hunt. And there appeared to be any number of them, and no one was worried about it, and it wasn't glamorous. And they just kept shooting until they were all gone.
Now, talking about all gone, this, if I'm not mistaken, and I often am, and you will no doubt correct me, the last quagga died in a zoo in Amsterdam. Am I correct?
Correct. 1883, almost certainly after the last quokka had died in the wild.
And what was a quagga doing in a zoo in Amsterdam? And why only
So,
one?
so those 19th century scientists and nations were busy colonizing the world and conquering peoples and what have you, and they loved their collections. Collections were enormous, private collections, public collections, and sort of one of everything. Everybody wanted one of everything. Um, and so there were a handful of quokkas in Europe. There are
Mhm.
20 mounted specimens still left in the world, and most of those have come from zoos. Um, they were they would be put in a rank, if you like, next to a normal stripy zebra, and they would be seen to be different, obviously. So
Right.
that was what I was doing in Europe.
Okay. So what is the major difference aside, I mean, we can see in this image, aside from the color pattern and where the stripes start and end, is there any major difference, or is this just a subspecies of your normal Burchell's plain zebra?
It absolutely is a subspecies of the plain zebra. That's got its own interesting story, which we may or may not unpack. But um, the whole point of the quagga is that it is at the end of a what the scientists call a cline, a color cline. If you look at plain zebra up in Kenya, Uganda,
Mhm.
they're terribly black and terribly white. It's a very, very distinctive black and white animal. And
Right.
if you come all the way down through Africa, they get progressively less obviously black and white. In Namibia, there are many, many animals which have got serious shadow striping, so much so that you begin to think it's not a sensible zebra in that plains way. If you go through, by the time you get to Tanzania, they're mostly black and white, but with some shadow stripes. And we now know that the quagga was at the end of this geographical cline, was the most distinctively unmarked zebra. And that picture that you see in front of you there suggests that any population of animals has variation in it, whether it's dogs or people or whatever. And this picture is a herd of zebras, part of the Quagga breeding project, and brilliant photograph taken by Bernard Wooding, and it shows even within the tiny little population we have the variation that you're
Mm.
looking.
Now, I know that the plain zebra are not able to be utilized as pack animals. They can't be ridden. Their spines are not designed to be. Is the quagga any different from a physical point of view?
As far as we know, they are identical. There probably was some differences. It's minor differences in size and what have you, depending on who the breeding stock was and what the conditions were like. Cape leopards are tiny, but they're exactly the same animal, basically, as leopards up in the northern part of our country, where they're twice the size. So there will have been that variation. Can you ride them? There are numerous examples of people using quagga as draft animals for carriages, both
Mm.
in Europe and in South Africa. Zebras are surprisingly spicy animals. They're difficult to manage,
Yeah.
even if you get them as a youngster.
Mm.
And so they are not natural draft animals. I suppose no animals are natural draft animals, but they have been bred to be so over the years. Difficult to handle, difficult to ride. They beat each other up at the drop of a hat if they don't like each other. They beat predators if necessary, and they will even beat us up. One of our most esteemed colleagues in the project has herself, a wonderful, wonderful woman, has
Mm.
herself been bitten by one of these
Yeah.
animals quite clearly when she was trying to nurse it.
You know, I worked at a property close to Johannesburg for about 40 years. And in that time, we had a breeding herd of zebra on the property. Now, they'd never been in the wild. They'd always been fed, yet they would bite and kick. And there were notices all over the property saying, beware the zebra bite and kick. And then come a weekend and you'd get a guest come in with a scratch or a bite mark and you'd go, what were you trying to feed them? And they were always honest. And the one I remember was a peanut butter and jam sandwich. And I go, why? You've seen the signs. And do you really think that zebra like PB&J? Obviously not, because you now come in for first aid.
Yeah, no, they're tough. They're very, very tough animals. They
Yeah.
survive in the wild with the most tremendous injuries from predators and what have you,
Mm.
and come as strong as ever. Now, I'm absolutely amazed by them. I mean, I'm not a horse person. I don't know very
Yeah.
much about horses, but I understand they're not much easier, and they're all related. They're all related. But don't mess with a zebra. Don't mess with them.
No, the zebras, the stallions specifically in the wild with tails missing. You know that's not lions. That's another stallion trying to show dominance. But March, let me take a step back, if I may, because I started this sort of in reverse. I should have asked you, why did you get involved? What are your qualifications?
My qualifications are absolutely zero. By training, an IT project manager, but some years ago I was writing quite regularly for a magazine, which, like many magazines, is now out of print, called
Mm,
Africa Geographic. It's got an online presence. And
mm,
I wrote for Africa Geographic for many years and I was very lucky to do so. One of the stories I covered in about 25 years ago was the Quagga Project. It's been an ongoing story in the Cape for many, many years. And many years after that, I was a bit slack, didn't have enough work, and I just phoned up the Quagga Project and said, I've always been thinking about it. If you'd like me to perhaps do some press releases or something like that,
mm.
I'm always up for that. And like all volunteering situations, they were keen to have some help, and I've been doing more than that for the last several years. I'm technically called a project coordinator, but I am a very small cog. I mean, look at that picture you put up there now. That land belongs to
Mm.
someone, and that
Right.
land has value. And they could be putting, I don't know, they could be putting eland on that land instead of quagga. So there are lots of people who are giving and working towards this.
Because I should imagine, and I know I read an email that you sent me just recently, and you were looking at that particular point to put herds of quagga onto people's land. But I should imagine you don't want predators there because you don't want to have years of breeding taken out by a pride of lions.
You don't. It's something that game reserve managers across Southern Africa have issues with. If you want to buy splendid sable at enormous prices for your game reserve, you
Yeah.
really are a bit wary of sticking them straight in with your lions because you see 50,000 Rand going every 5 minutes. Um,
Yeah.
but, so that is a thing. And in fact, we are in discussions with a reserve at the moment who do have
Mm.
predators. No, we don't want them predated at this time.
Yeah.
Yes, we do want them predated if we manage to make a success of this project over the next decades. Absolutely.
Well, obviously, because then they just become part of the food chain. You mentioned eland earlier. There is a reserve which will remain nameless, and they brought in 36 eland because the eland had been missing for a while. They hadn't checked if those particular eland had ever been exposed to predators. They hadn't. 16 eland were taken in the first week before the eland realized that short, tawny things have taken sort of Bob, Ted, Carol, and Alice, and they ran to the northern corner of the park, and they were too far. The lions just went, you know what? We've had 16 of your closest friends. You guys can take over. We're not interested anymore.
Oh, how that wildlife manager must have despaired. He just,
Yes.
oh dear.
At the end of the day, what can you say? Oops, I didn't mean to go there. That was a baboon that was a quagga of a different color. So where is the project today? It's been going for what, 30 odd years now?
Indeed. I think we would say 87 we started.
Yeah.
Um, so the project, it's a rebreeding project. It's
Mm.
not similar from trying to make the best merino sheep or the best Aberdeen Angus bull or whatever it would be.
Right.
The aim of the project, at its simplest, it's a bit more complex than this, but at its simplest is to say, can we rebreed plains zebra such that you could drop them into a 19th century herd of quagga and you wouldn't know the difference? You and I wouldn't be able to spot them.
Right.
So it's all about the phenotype, as the scientists would say. What do they look like? The working assumption, based on genetics, is that these are plain zebra and there are no identifiable differences in digestion or hoof pattern or all the rest of it. It's color. It's all about color.
Okay.
So
So,
therefore, we look at the color. We are looking for animals. There are there is great variability even in the very limited evidence we have for what quokka looked like back in the day. We're looking for animals which typically have strong neck stripes, very much reduced striping over the rump, clean legs, white underbelly or equivalent, and a dark, not always fully dark, but a darker background underlying color. So we tend to think of zebra, plain zebra, as white with black stripes. We're looking for brownish with black stripes and quite a lot less of those stripes. We're looking for clean over the bottom.
so before people leap up and down and go, "Oh, you're genetically modifying these are not descendants of." You didn't find quagga DNA in a piece of amber, and somewhere in a lab, Jeff Goldblum is trying to pull the stuff apart and put it together like the fly. This is, as you pointed out, rebreeding in order to get the color back.
This is exactly the same, and it may or may not be doable in the
Mm.
sense of we assume that all the traits that we're looking for are underlying in some animal somewhere that we can bring into the project. And I
Right.
think we're convinced that we can do that. But it's not dissimilar to if all the yellow Labradors in the world emigrated to Mars tomorrow and we were only left with black ones, can we rebreed yellow? And the
Mm.
answer is, in that case, you can.
Okay.
It's just a question of trying hard.
But now, does this open the doors for other animals that have gone extinct, and could possibly be brought back via this type of rebreeding? But you would then need some form of DNA. If you think of maybe the dodo, for instance, if people are often talking about bringing those back, but there is no living relative to that.
It's a very complicated world, and in 20 years' time, the answer will be very different to the one that we know, and I don't anyway know all the facts.
Mm.
But broadly speaking, if you've got one living example of a species or a
Right.
subspecies that extinct, you could, in theory, clone that animal and get lots of them, and then you'd have to work out what you're going to do about the lack of diversity. But you
Mm.
could, in theory, that's if you've got a living animal. A lot
Right.
more cloning goes on in the world than we all understand. Many horses are cloned for polo, for example. A lot of polo ponies are clones. Can you believe it?
No.
Thousands of fish, and nearly all the plants we eat are cloned.
Okay.
So cloning is one possible. If you haven't got any live animal, you can go the Steven Spielberg route, and you can theoretically extract DNA and do all sorts of clever stuff and use CRISPR technologies and all the rest of it. And this is where they're hoping to go with the mammoth. You can theoretically see how to do that on paper. The difficulty is doing it in real life. You can't do it all in a petri dish anymore. Yet,
Yet. You need a big
you've got to create
mammoth,
an embryo of some sort and put it in a womb of some sort.
Right.
So if the dodo, for example, if you could find the nearest relative, which would be some sort of pigeon in that case, you could theoretically finagle your way to hatching an egg, which was part or wholly dodo. And then the final thing is, what if you've got something which is very, very like it, which is what we're doing here, the same species, but it's just not quite right. Then you can work your way towards it through breeding.
Okay.
There are these different options. What you cannot do under current technological circumstances is take a genuinely extinct species. For example, the most famous one for this is the European aurochs, the bull, famous wild cattle of Europe. And we know what it looked like. There are some skulls, there are some paintings or pictures and what have you. We know roughly what it looked like and how it behaved. And the only way that animal is ever coming back from the dead is massive advances in technology that would enable you to take DNA from bone and then clone from there or something. Or you try and rebreed it from other species, which is what they've been doing in Europe for 60, 70 years. And it sort of is an interesting idea. You make something that looks exactly like the old one, but it's got actually no genetic link to it whatsoever. It's not the same thing. Whereas the quagga and 2 or 3 other projects around the world is actually, it's the same species. There's no reason why this couldn't be done. Go back to our Labradors. This, if the underlying genetics are out there in the population somewhere, and if we identify them, and if we manage to keep the animals alive through a few generations, theoretically, we can produce an animal that is indistinguishable from the original quagga, and its teeth and its nose and its tail and its hooves will be no different because it's just a plain zebra.
So it's not sort of the island of Dr. Moreau where there are critters wandering around that are part mammoth, I don't know, part Cape clawless otter type of thing.
Well, we've already seen that. That does exist in the world. If you do interspecific breeding, we have those things. America loves this business of those big cats in their backyards. They breed ligers, tiger lions, and they look like both. Typically, when you do that, you end up with sterile offspring. Not always. There are lots of closely related species that you can mate together, and you just end up with hybrids.
You can do donkeys and zebras.
Say again?
You can do donkeys and zebras. Come up with a Z-donk.
You get a Z-donk and you get zorses.
Zorses, of course, but they're all sterile, as you say. So
they are sterile. Yeah.
I think they're trying to save their own species. They're going, no, you can take us to a point, and then we're sorry, but you're not taking it any further. We're making ourselves sterile before we're going to end up in a lab or behind bars for people to go ooh-ah at.
100%. And of course, if you do isolate an animal for long enough behind a mountain range, underneath a river, on an island, they will, because there is natural variation in every species, they will eventually sort of drift into some other format or form. And that's probably what happened to about 300,000 years ago to the quagga. That it descended from plain zebra, and some stage either through isolation or highly dominant lineage of brown animals, or because of tsetse flies or lack of tsetse flies, or for whatever reason, that's probably one. There'll be some reason. We don't know that reason at this stage.
Could you imagine? I'm just thinking what could possibly be brought back, specifically as you were pointing out the ligers and the tigons in America. Could you imagine if somebody brought back a saber-toothed tiger? Could you imagine what chaos that would wreak in a game reserve on the animal population, on the prey population?
And whatever we know, as your friend Jeff Goldblum would say, is there would be unintended consequences.
Yeah, indeed. So where to from here, March? Where does the project go? How many animals are already on reserves here in South Africa?
So the Quagga Project's running about 150 animals, and some leave the project every year, and new ones are born every year. And as we go through time, the number which meet the breed standard, to use sort of the modern jargon,
Yeah.
goes up every year. So once we once had perhaps one animal we thought we could drop into that notional 19th century herd, and now we've got dozens.
Mm.
But they're still, or if you like, on one end of the spectrum, the color is still an issue with us. There's about 150 in the Quagga Project. Then private breeders, we all sort of gang together. We can't afford to run huge herds when we don't really have any money.
Yeah.
But there is private breeders. There's one family particular, the most extraordinary one, called Albi Best Trinicht, and she has taken this on as, in a sense, her life's work, or one of her life works. And she's got about the same number of animals as well, and is a great breeder, and we all swap animals. And right today, the reason that I'm not in Wellington doing a game capture today is because we're swapping 12 animals out at quite a lot of expense between herds today. So where does it go, was your question. If we could create a herd of, let's say, 50 animals that are likely to breed true, and would have to manage for a while, then it would be most fantastic opportunity for the Quagga Project to say, actually, our work here is nearly done. It's time to take this highly managed project where we know whose baby is who and whose father and mother and sire and dam and all the rest of it. And we plonk them into a nice big reserve where they can range extensively, behave more naturally. Remember, if we're herds of 25 animals, it's difficult to know if we're getting good natural behavior.
Right.
But if we had a 50 animals going to 100 animals, you can be pretty sure that that's not dissimilar to any decent sized reserve. So we are looking right now for a home for up to, say, 50 animals where we can range them extensively, and where we will have to continue to manage, or the reserve managers will have to continue to manage. And then, in a sense, the Quagga Project could probably step down. We are just a collective of, I won't say amateurs because I'm the amateur, but there are professional animal breeding farmers involved. Our scientific input is a bit low at the moment. For many, many years, it's been very, very high with genetic specialists involved. But that's where we go. We need to get a herd, a big herd, on a big piece of ground, and then all of us on the edge can keep breeding beautiful stallions to drop into that, and so on. And then eventually there are enough animals, and we've seen this throughout the game industry, eventually there are enough animals for everyone who is in the original range to say, how can I put my hands on a few quagga? And they will replace their zebra with quagga, because those stripy plain zebra do not belong in range. So that's our vision.
Okay. So what is that place near Craddock? The Mountain Zebra Reserve needs to be aware. They need to be putting lots of quagga in there to make new homes.
The mountain zebra, as you probably know from your homework, is quite interesting. You know, mountain zebra very, very, very nearly went the same way as the quagga. I think they've split them into two populations, which may or may not be a valid classification, but nonetheless, the mountain zebra that we know in South Africa, I think went down to about 6 or 12 individuals before someone stuck them on that mountain.
It's this almost the same as what happened in Addo when they shot the Addo elephant down to 11 individuals before the government of the day went, hang on a second, this is a tourist resource. We could be making money out of this instead of just having heaps of carcasses all over the place.
What a fabulous reserve that is now. They've managed to get, I think it goes from the sea right up into the mountains.
It does indeed. Coming from Port Elizabeth as I do, that was our go-to game reserve on the weekends, because it was about 80 Ks, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. So you could go see the elephants and then go home, having witnessed one of the big five in those days. But it was very interesting. It really was. March, for people who are watching this and go, this is something I could be interested in, Can they get involved? Are you looking for people to become involved as volunteers? Maybe landowners going, hang on a second, I've got some space. Maybe they'd like a couple of hectares from me. How does that work?
So the first thing is it's always interesting to see the animals. If
Mhm.
you're in town, so most of these are on private farms.
Yeah.
Fairfield Wine Estate has got a
Mhm.
small. They run game drives into their game reserve, and they're expanding that game reserve at the moment.
Mhm.
So Fairfield is the sort of go-to place to easily go. There's a rather lovely guest house called Bartolomeo's Clip in
Mhm.
near Wellington. It's very long, and they've got a lovely game reserve, big reserve, 3,000 odd hectares, and they for their guests and what have you, they do drives as well.
Okay.
How do people get involved? So the big piece of ground, we for literally 3 or 4 years, every time we have an annual general meeting, we sit down, how are we doing getting the reserve? And we're struggling with that. We have a good idea for 2025. So game reserve owners we are interested in talking to. We don't always have animals, and we have learned over the years, you don't just take one from here, one from there. You take whole family groups, and you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
obviously, conservation. And that is something that we have encouraged. It's a little bit complicated sometimes, who owns the animal, who makes the decisions, and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, that is important. We need extensive grazing. And it is our intention that one day all the zebras in the old range would actually be would be quagga rather than
Mhm.
plain.
Would
Um,
you
yeah.
Now, I was going to say, would the new owners, in inverted commas, still have to keep up things like the stud book that you've already instituted, so that you know that Bob has had children with Mary and Ryan is still running free, living the bachelor life that he does, type of thing?
Um, yes, it is very much encouraged because we're working with a population of about 300 animals here.
Mm.
So inbreeding is a real thing. So yes, we do that. But there comes a moment when you go extensive, when you have to let go of that. You can do it by observation. Zebras are, I want to say, loyal to each other, but they're mostly brutal to each other. Um, if a stallion has 5 mares, it is
Mm.
very, you can observe them in a group. It is highly likely, and we've proved this through when we do the genetics, when we drop animals. It is highly likely that the foals will be his because they defend their mares very fiercely and
Yeah.
all the rest of it. So you can actually do a lot of that by observation, and our earlier stud records are all by observation, but on small pieces of ground where your observations are good.
Mm.
Nowadays, an animal, we do actually take bloods and they get microchipped, sort of good stuff. Um, so it's a do new owners have to manage the animals like mad? If they
Mm.
own the animals, they buy them, they obviously can do sort of what they like. We have one what's the right word, sort of sanity check on all of this, and that is that if you are involved with quagga, we actually
Mm.
call them Rao quagga because there was Reinhold Rao started the project. um, if you are involved with Rao quagga, then you are encouraged to register them with the breed society so
Right.
that everybody knows what we're dealing with. This
Mm.
animal's mother was John, and that animal's father was, that's unlikely to be John. Well, it could be.
Yeah, I wasn't going
Um,
to correct you. You never know nowadays,
uh,
March. Never know.
well, of course, and sometimes we do misidentify when they're young. But it's so if you register your animals with the overall stud book,
Right.
then everyone knows what's going on, and in fact, your animals are probably a little bit more valuable because you can see the provenance of that.
Mm.
So yes, there is management involved, and we need to sell animals. What we're doing today is we're moving 12 animals off to another farm because we
Mm.
just don't have space at Elandsburg Reserve in Wellington. And I'm hoping it's going really well. It's always quite
Well,
difficult.
you'll find out a little bit later. Is there a website that people can go to that they can have a look at what work is being done, have a look at what the quagga look like, where they are, and once again, how they can get involved?
Yes, absolutely. So the Quagga Project website, just put it in the Quagga Project. It'll come up straight away. I don't have to give you all the ZARs and the orgs and all the rest of it. Quagga Project. You showed a picture of one part of the screenshot you put up earlier was a picture from the website. There's quite a lot of resource on there. We always wish we had more time to do more on the website.
Yeah.
Um, there are email addresses on there, info at, and you can get in touch with me and we can learn more and talk more about it. I do get emails from people overseas who are
Can you
interested in it.
Does take a lot to deliver quagga to people all over South
Not
Africa.
not a lot. Not a lot. There was a time in the Cape when the University of Stellenbosch, which has got a meat sciences faculty, which is always a little bit worrying,
Yeah.
and they would inquire as to whether we could make biltong and what's the and
Dried
sausage
horse and stuff, sausage out of
from
quagga.
quagga, in order to, because there's a whole thing in the animal world about use it or lose it and value and
Yeah.
what have you. And I would like to suggest that they go and look at the normal plain zebra, if that's right
I
with
was
you.
about to say there are gazillions of them, but it's interesting that their go-to is the first thing is, can we make food? It's been extinct. It's been brought back, and now you want to make it extinct again. This is not a cyclical thing of bring them back, kill them off, bring them back, kill them off, and just
No,
leave
no,
it up
no,
to the next
no.
generation.
Stellenbosch have actually been amazing in helping us. They do a
Oh,
lot of
that's
the
great.
DNA work and what have you.
Yeah.
And they're lovely, lovely Annelien Malloy, who's been
Mm.
helping us recently. So these are all good things.
Great stuff.
But I hope we just can be left to keep going.
Mhm.
Encouraging words from everyone is always good. We keep putting out pictures, and I think we're very close. We brought back something which should never have been
Yeah.
out of existence.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that one day the plains of specifically the Karoo will be running rampant with large herds and dazzles of quagga um, taking their rightful place once again. My guest today on In Conversation With has been March Turnbull from the Quagga Project. March, thank you so very much for taking time out of your schedule to chat with me.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.